farmer mocked his poor neighbor, but he came back driving a luxury car. Richard Thompson spat on the dirt ground as Robert Johnson begged for a chance to work the harvest. The farmer laughed scornfully, saying folks like Robert would never climb out of the hole they were in. That September morning, Robert had woken before sunrise and walked 3 miles to the Thompson farm. His wife Sarah was 7 months pregnant, and they didn't even have money for milk. Desperation had brought him there, swallowing what little pride he had left. "Please, Mr. Thompson, I'm a hard worker, you know that. I just need a chance," Robert said, twisting his old hat in his hands. Richard, a 30-year-old man who had inherited his father's land, adjusted his hat and let out a cruel laugh. Robert, you just don't get it, do you? Some folks are born to give orders, and some are born to take them. But you're not even good at taking orders." The words cut deep. Robert lowered his head, his face burning with shame. Other workers nearby stopped to watch, some with pity, others just curious. "I work hard, Mr. Thompson. You've even said yourself I was good." "Were, Robert. Were. But that was before you got those crazy ideas about wanting to own something. Remember when you said you'd buy a piece of land?" Richard let out a loud guffaw. "Where's your land now, huh?" Robert swallowed hard. He'd lost the small plot he'd scraped together to buy when he couldn't keep up with the payments. His dream of owning something had turned into a nightmare. "Listen here, Robert," Richard went on, his tone even crueler. "Folks like you never crawl out of the mud. It's in your nature. No matter what you try, you'll always end up right back where you started. So quit dreaming and accept your place." He spat on the ground near Robert's feet and turned, walking toward the big house. Robert stood there, fighting back tears. He wouldn't give Richard that satisfaction. As he walked home, every word echoed in his mind. The humiliation hurt worse than hunger. Sarah waited for him at the door of their small wooden house, her round belly standing out under her simple dress. "Well?" she asked hopefully. Robert shook his head. Sarah didn't say anything, just hugged him. They stood like that for minutes, silent, lost in their own thoughts. "We'll figure something out," she whispered. "We always do." But this time, Robert wasn't so sure. Richard's words rang in his ears. "Folks like you never crawl out of the mud." Was it true? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us newcomers. Now back to the story. That afternoon, Robert decided to go into town. He didn't have bus fare, so he walked for over 2 hours under the scorching sun. His old boots had holes, and with every step, he felt the hot sand seeping in. In the main square of Greenfield, a small town in Kentucky, Robert stopped in front of the City Hall's job board. There weren't many options, and all required experience he didn't have or more schooling than he'd gotten. Then his eyes landed on a different ad. Wanted truck driver for hauling company. Experience required, good pay. The address was on the outskirts of town. Robert knew how to drive. He'd learned from his father when he was younger, before everything in his family fell apart. But he'd never driven professionally. He looked at the ad one more time and made a decision that would change his life. The hauling company, Valley Star, operated out of a large warehouse by the highway. Robert pushed the glass door open and found himself facing a middle-aged woman typing on a computer. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up. "I'm here about the truck driver position." Now she looked at him. Robert noticed her glance sweeping up and down, assessing his simple, worn-out clothes. "Do you have experience?" Robert hesitated for a split second. He thought of Sarah, the baby on the way, and Richard Thompson's cruel words. "Yes, I do. I worked for 5 years hauling freight for a company in Louisville." The lie came out easier than he expected. The woman jotted something down. "Mr. Miller will want to speak with you. Wait here." 15 minutes later, Robert stood before Anthony Miller, a tall, lean man in his 50s with a graying mustache and a serious gaze. "So, you have experience with heavy loads?" Anthony asked. "Yes, sir. Big rigs, small trucks. I've driven them all." "And why did you leave your last job?" Robert had prepared for this question during the wait. The company went under, sir. Financial trouble. Anthony studied him for a few endless seconds. Look, Robert, I'll be straight with you. I really need a driver, but the work's tough. Long hauls, odd hours. And I won't tolerate sloppiness or lies. You up for it? Absolutely, sir. Then we'll do a test run. Be here tomorrow at 6 in the morning. You'll ride shotgun with me to Lexington. If you really know how to drive, the job's yours. Robert left the trucking company with his heart racing. He'd gotten a chance, but now he had to prove he deserved it. He spent the whole night awake, studying everything he could find about routes, traffic regulations, and freight transport. Sarah helped, reading aloud from manuals they'd borrowed from the public library. "You've got this," she said, running her fingers through his hair. "I know you do." The next morning, Robert arrived 15 minutes early. Anthony was already there, drinking coffee. "Punctual, that's good. Let's see if you drive as well as you show up on time." The truck was a blue Peterbilt, bigger than any vehicle Robert had ever driven. His hands grew clammy when Anthony handed him the keys. "Easy, kid. It's just a truck," Anthony said, noticing his nerves. Robert took a deep breath and started the engine. The first few hours were tense. He drove with extreme care, paying attention to every detail. Anthony watched silently, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. On the road to Lexington, it began to rain. Robert slowed down and turned on the headlights. Then he heard a strange noise from the engine. "Mr. Miller, something's wrong." "What?" "A noise in the engine. It doesn't sound right." Anthony listened. To him it seemed fine, but Robert insisted. "Better pull over and check, sir. Could be serious." They stopped on the shoulder. Robert popped the hood and found the issue. A loose belt about to snap. If they'd kept driving, the engine could have been badly damaged. "How'd you catch that?" Anthony asked, impressed. "My dad was a mechanic. He taught me to listen to what engines say." They made it to a nearby garage and fixed the problem. For the rest of the trip, Anthony grew more relaxed and started chatting. "You know, Robert, in 30 years in this business, I've seen plenty of seasoned drivers miss something like that. You've got a natural talent." Robert felt a surge of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. Back at the trucking company, Anthony didn't hesitate. "The job's yours. $1,200 to start, plus meal vouchers and fuel. You can begin Monday." Robert could hardly believe it. It was 3 times what he made from odd jobs. In the days that followed, life began to change. With his first paycheck, Robert managed to buy decent food for the house and some clothes for Sarah. She was radiant, rubbing her belly and dreaming about the baby's future. "Now we can dream again," she said, her eyes shining. Robert worked diligently, always arriving early and studying routes in his free time. Anthony began trusting him with the most important deliveries. Within 3 months, Robert was considered one of the company's best drivers. It was during one of these trips that he crossed paths with Richard on the road. The farmer was in his imported car when he spotted Robert driving the truck for the hauling company. Richard honked, signaled for Robert to stop, and stepped out of the car with an ironic smile. "Well, look who we have here. Robert, the truck driver now. How touching," Richard said in his usual mocking tone. Robert stepped down from the truck cab. He was wearing a clean shirt and new jeans. He looked more confident, but Richard didn't miss the chance to humiliate him. "So, now you drive other people's trucks, huh? At least you look halfway decent now," Richard laughed loudly. "But don't forget where you came from, Robert. Reality will come knocking again one day." Robert felt anger rise, but he held back. He had too much to lose now. "I have to go, Richard. Work won't wait." "That's right. Go on and work. That's all you're good for anyway," Richard shouted as Robert climbed back into the truck. The words stung, but Robert had learned to turn pain into fuel. Every humiliation became more motivation to prove Richard wrong. Months later, Anthony called Robert in for an important talk. "Robert, I'll be straight with you. I've never had an employee as dedicated as you. You come in early, leave late, never cause trouble, and the clients love you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. That's why I want to make you an offer. How about becoming fleet supervisor? $1,800 plus commissions. You'd be in charge of coordinating the other drivers and overseeing truck maintenance." Robert could barely respond. It was a promotion he never imagined possible. "I accept, sir. You won't regret it." "I'm sure I won't." With the new position, Robert could finally dream bigger. He and Sarah began planning to buy their own home. Their baby had arrived, a beautiful girl they named Hope, and everything seemed to be falling into place. But Richard couldn't stand seeing his neighbor prosper. In town, he started spreading malicious rumors about Robert. "That Robert suddenly has a lot of money. Don't you think that's strange?" he'd say to anyone who'd listen at the downtown bar. "Truck drivers don't make that much. He must be up to something on the side, if you know what I mean," he'd add with a sly smile. The rumors began to spread. Some reached Robert's ears, and though he was worried, he chose to ignore them. His conscience was clear. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, the situation took a turn when Hope fell ill. It was a serious infection that the doctors in Greenfield couldn't properly treat. The child needed to be taken to Louisville to a specialized hospital. "Robert, she needs surgery urgently," the doctor said. "But the procedure is expensive. It'll cost at least $15,000. Robert felt his world collapse. Even with his good salary, he didn't have that much saved. He tried banks, but none would lend money to a driver without collateral. Desperate, he sold everything of value they had: the used car he'd managed to buy, their new furniture, even Sarah's wedding ring. He managed to save up $8,000, but it still wasn't enough. That's when he made a tough decision. He quit his job to access his 401k and severance pay. With everything combined, he got close to the amount he needed. Anthony tried to talk him out of it. "Robert, have you lost your mind? This job is your security. How will you support your family after this?" "Mr. Miller, it's my daughter. I'll figure it out later." With tears in his eyes, Anthony understood. He even helped speed up the severance process. Robert took Hope to Louisville. The surgery was a success, but the days in the hospital ate up the rest of the money. When they returned to Greenfield, the family was practically back to square one. Richard heard all about it through town gossip. The news of Robert's daughter's illness and how he'd spent everything reached his ears like sweet music. Finally, that man who dared to prosper was back where he belonged. One afternoon, Robert was in the square with Hope in his arms, waiting for a work opportunity. The girl was better now, but still needed care. Richard showed up with some friends coming from the bar. "Well, look who's here," Richard said loudly enough to draw attention. "The great supervisor of the trucking company." Robert tried to ignore him, but Richard walked closer. "How's life, Robert? Heard you've come back to reality. That reality I told you about, remember? The one you can never escape." Robert held his daughter tight and stood up. "Richard, I don't want trouble. I'm just taking care of my girl." "Yeah, I heard she was sick. Too bad, huh?" His tone dripped with fake sympathy. "But at least now you understand there's no point in dreaming too big. Life always puts us in our place." People in the square stopped to watch. Richard was clearly relishing the chance to humiliate Robert publicly. "You know what really gets me?" Richard continued. "How you spent everything, and now you're here, begging for scraps again, just like the old days." Robert felt anger boiling inside, but he looked down at his daughter and held himself back. "I'm not begging, Richard. I'm looking for work." "Work?" Richard laughed loudly. "After leaving the trucking company like that? Who'd want to hire someone who quits at the first sign of trouble?" The words hit Robert like punches. He knew Richard was trying to break his dignity once more, but their desperate financial situation made every word cut deeper. "Listen, Robert," Richard said, lowering his voice slightly, but still loud enough for everyone to hear. "I feel sorry for you, really, so I'll make you an offer." Robert eyed him warily. "I've got some hard labor at the farm, cleaning stables, hauling manure, that kind of thing. I'll pay $100 a week. It's not much, but for someone who's got nothing." He shrugged with a cruel smile. The square fell into an uncomfortable silence. Everyone knew Richard was offering the most humiliating work possible, and for a laughable sum. Robert looked at his daughter, then at Sarah, who had arrived and was watching from a distance. He knew they needed the money, no matter how small. But accepting would give Richard the satisfaction of seeing him crawl. "I'll think about it," Robert said, stepping away. "Don't take too long, you hear?" Richard called after him. "Jobs like this don't wait forever." That night, Robert and Sarah talked late into the evening. They only had $50 left at home, and they needed to pay rent, buy food, and get medicine for Hope. "Maybe you should take it," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "At least until something better comes along." "Sarah, you saw how he treated me. He wants to humiliate me." "I know, love, but Hope needs her medicine, and we need to eat." Robert knew she was right, but the wound to his pride hurt too much. He had worked so hard to get out of that situation, and now he was being forced to go back worse than before. The next morning, as he was getting ready to go to Richard Thompson's farm, there was a knock at the door. It was a man in a suit, about Robert Johnson's age, with an imported car parked in front of the house. "Robert Johnson?" the man asked. "That's me. My name is Edward Williams. I'm a partner at a Merry Hall in Louisville. May I come in? I have a proposal for you." Robert and Sarah exchanged glances, completely confused. The man entered and sat in the small living room. "You don't know me, but I know you. A few months ago, you saved one of my shipments from a serious accident." Robert didn't understand. "Sir, I think you must be mistaken." "I'm not mistaken. Valley Star truck, road to Lexington, rainy day. You noticed an engine problem that could have caused a bad accident. The shipment was worth $200,000. Now Robert remembered. It was one of the trips he'd taken with Anthony Miller. "Oh yes, I remember, but anyone would have done the same." "No, Robert, they wouldn't have. I heard you left the trucking company because of your daughter's illness. Anthony told me everything. Said he never had an employee as dedicated and honest as you." Robert still didn't see where this was going. "That's why I'm here with a proposal. I want you to be my partner in a new logistics company I'm starting. You'd bring your knowledge and dedication. I'd bring the startup capital." Robert thought he must be dreaming. "Mr. Williams, I don't have money to invest in anything." "You don't need money, Robert. I need you. Someone who knows the business and is trustworthy. The partnership would be 50-50 after 3 years once the company is established." Sarah squeezed Robert's hand under the table. "But I don't understand. Why would you do this?" Edward smiled. "Because I recognize talent when I see it, and because I believe the right people in the right place can make all the difference. You saved my shipment that day. Now, I want to help you save your life." Robert felt tears in his eyes. After so much suffering, a real opportunity had finally come. "I accept, Mr. Williams. You won't regret it." "I'm sure I won't. Can we start on Monday?" After Edward left, Robert and Sarah hugged and cried with relief. Hope slept peacefully in her crib, unaware of the change that had just happened in their family's life. "You won't be working for Richard," Sarah said, smiling. "I'll never have to humble myself to anyone again," Robert replied. The new company, named Loggyhall, grew quickly. Edward had the connections and capital. Robert had the hands-on experience and dedication. They specialized in transporting cargo other companies refused because it was too difficult or dangerous. Within 6 months, they had 5 trucks and 10 employees. Robert learned about administration, accounting, and managing people. Edward was a patient mentor, teaching him everything he knew about business. "You have a natural talent for this, Robert," Edward often said. "You just needed an opportunity." Richard watched the company's growth from afar. His own business wasn't doing well. The irregular rains had ruined his harvests, and he'd made some bad investments. Envy began eating at him. "How is that nobody thriving like this?" he muttered to himself. He decided to try sabotaging Robert's business. He approached some of Loggyhall's clients and offered cheaper services, even though he knew he'd lose money. He wanted to ruin his former neighbor's company at any cost. "Be careful with this Loggyhall," he told local business owners. "New company, no reputation. Better to work with people you know and trust." Some clients did leave, influenced by Richard's comments. Robert was worried at first, but Edward reassured him. "Robert, in the business world, there will always be people trying to bring down those who are rising. Our job is to be so good that the lies can't touch us." And that's exactly what happened. The quality of Loggyhall's service spoke for itself. The clients who left soon came back, realizing they couldn't find the same level of professionalism elsewhere. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 2 years later, Loggy Hall had become the largest trucking company in the region. Robert had bought a house for his family and a used but well-maintained car. Hope was growing up healthy and bright, and Sarah was pregnant again. It was around this time that Richard's problems worsened. A prolonged drought devastated his crops, and he discovered the farm manager had been stealing money for years. Suddenly, he found himself deep in debt with no working capital. The bank began pressuring him for overdue payments. Richard had to sell part of his land and let go of most of his workers. His wife, tired of the constant crises and her husband's increasingly difficult temper, decided to separate and went to live with her mother in the city. For the first time in his life, Richard was alone, dealing with financial troubles he never imagined he'd face. The arrogance he'd always shown began giving way to desperation. One afternoon, as Robert drove down the town's main road in his new car, a black sedan he'd bought with the company's first significant profit, he saw Richard walking along the roadside. The former farmer looked visibly worn, with wrinkled clothes and an unshaven face. Robert slowed down. For a moment, he considered driving past, remembering all the humiliations he'd endured, but something inside him wouldn't allow it. He stopped the car and rolled down the window. "Richard, need a ride?" Richard looked up, surprised. He recognized Robert and then glanced at the car. For a few seconds, he didn't know what to do. His pride screamed to refuse, but his legs couldn't take another step. Where are you headed?" "Into town." "Get in." Richard opened the passenger door and climbed in. The car's interior was clean and smelled new. Soft music played on the radio. It was a stark contrast to his own situation. The two sat in silence for a few minutes. Richard stared out the window, avoiding Robert's gaze. Finally, Robert broke the silence. "How are you, Richard?" "Bad," Richard admitted, unable to lie. "Really bad." Robert said nothing, just kept driving. After a few more minutes, Richard couldn't take it anymore. "Robert, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Are you hiring at your company?" Robert glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Richard kept his eyes down, clearly embarrassed. "Why do you ask?" "Because I need work. I've lost almost everything. The farm, my family. All I have left is the house in town, and even that I don't know for how long." Robert pulled the car over and turned to face Richard. "Are you asking me for a job?" "I am," Richard said, his voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve it after everything I did to you. But I'm desperate, Robert. I have nowhere else to turn." Robert studied the face of the man who had once been his greatest tormentor. He no longer saw the arrogant farmer, but a broken and humbled man. "Richard, can you drive a truck?" "Not very well, but I can learn." "And would you be willing to start at the bottom, with a beginner driver's salary?" "Yes, I would." Robert started the car again and continued driving. Monday at 6 in the morning, Loggy Hall office. "I'll give you a chance, but let me warn you, in my company everyone is treated with respect no matter their position, and I expect the same in return." Richard nodded, still unable to believe what was happening. "Robert, why are you doing this? After everything—" Robert stayed silent for a moment, choosing his words. "Because I've learned that holding on to grudges only hurts us in the end, and because everyone deserves a second chance." When they reached the town, Richard got out of the car and turned to Robert. "Thank you, really. Don't thank me yet. Show me through your work if you truly deserve this opportunity." On Monday, Richard was at the door of Loggy Hall at 5:45 in the morning. Robert arrived a few minutes later and was surprised by his punctuality. "Ready to start?" "More than ready." Robert introduced Richard to the other employees as the new driver. Some knew his story and were surprised, but Robert made it clear the past stayed in the past. The first few days were hard for Richard. He wasn't used to taking orders or working with his hands, but necessity outweighed pride. He pushed himself to learn and adapt. Robert watched from a distance without interfering too much. He wanted to see if Richard was truly willing to change, or if it was just momentary desperation. 2 weeks later, During a tricky delivery at a construction site, Richard volunteered to carry heavy cement bags alone when he saw the helper had back pain. He worked hard for hours, sweaty and covered in dust, but didn't complain. Robert witnessed the scene and was impressed. The arrogant man he once knew would never have done something like that. "How was your day?" Robert asked when they got back to the office. "Tiring but good," Richard replied. "It's been a long time since I felt truly useful." As the months passed, Richard adjusted to his new reality. He learned to drive bigger trucks, handle different types of cargo, and most importantly, work as part of a team. The other employees, who had initially eyed him with suspicion, began respecting him for his effort and dedication. Robert's perception of his former rival also shifted. He saw that behind the arrogance was an insecure man who used dominance to hide his own weaknesses. One day during lunch, Richard approached Robert. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course." They stepped away from the other employees and sat at a separate table. "Robert, I want to apologize, truly, for everything I put you through." Robert chewed slowly, thinking about his response. "Richard, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I was cruel to you for no reason. The truth is, I was jealous." "Jealous? Of what?" "Your determination, your ability to get back up after every fall. I was born with everything handed to me and never had to fight for anything. When I saw you succeeding through your own effort, I felt small." Robert was surprised by the honesty. "I thought if you managed to rise in life, it somehow diminished me, as if there was only so much success in the world and yours meant less for me." "And now?" Robert asked. "Now I understand everyone carves their own path, and that putting others down didn't make me bigger, it just made me a smaller person." Robert extended his hand. "Apology accepted. Let's move forward." They shook hands, and Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Forgiveness had freed not just Richard, but himself as well. Months later, Edward approached Robert with an unexpected proposal. "Robert, an American multinational wants to buy our company. They're offering a very good amount. And you want to sell? I want to know what you think. You would remain as regional director, with an excellent salary and profit sharing. It would mean complete financial independence for you and your family." Robert thought about the offer for a few days. He talked to Sarah, who supported whatever decision he made. "What matters is that you're happy," she said, "and that we can give the children a better future." Yes, children. Their second child had been born, a boy they named Michael. The house was livelier and full of energy. Robert decided to accept the offer. Logie Hall was sold for $5 million, of which Robert received $2.5 million as his share of the business. It was more money than he had ever imagined having. With the money, Robert invested in his children's education and some small businesses. He bought a bigger house for his family and a more luxurious car. But what made him happiest was being able to help others who were facing the same struggles he once had. He created a small microcredit program for low-income individuals who wanted to start their own businesses. Many in town benefited from the initiative. Mr. Thompson, who continued working as a driver for the now American company, watched the changes in Robert's life with mixed feelings. He was happy for his former rival's success, but also a little sad about his own situation. One day, Robert called him for a private conversation. "Mr. Thompson, I have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" "I'm setting up a small logistics consulting firm. Nothing too big, but I need someone who understands the field and has experience with rural producers. You know everyone in the region." Mr. Thompson was surprised. "But Robert, I don't know anything about consulting. You understand rural problems, supplier relationships, harvest planning. That's what I need. The rest we'll learn together." "And why do you want to give me this opportunity?" Robert smiled. "Because I believe in second chances, and because you've already proven you've really changed." Mr. Thompson accepted the offer and became a minority partner in the new business. Working together, the two former rivals developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. The consulting firm grew slowly but steadily. Mr. Thompson proved excellent at building relationships with rural clients who trusted him because he understood their struggles. Robert handled the technical and administrative side, 5 years after the first humiliation on the farm, Robert was driving calmly down a country road when he saw Mr. Thompson waiting by the roadside. This time, though, Mr. Thompson was well-dressed and simply waiting for a ride they'd arranged. Robert stopped and rolled down the window of his car, now an even more luxurious model, bought with the consulting firm's profits. "Need a lift, partner?" Mr. Thompson got in the car, smiling. "You know, Robert, sometimes I think about how strange life is. Who'd have thought we'd end up working together?" "Life teaches a lot to those willing to learn," Robert replied. "I've learned that others' success doesn't diminish mine, and that treating people well is always the best business. And I've learned that forgiving frees the one who forgives more than the one who's forgiven." They continued their drive, talking about plans for the business and their families. Mr. Thompson had reconciled with his ex-wife and was trying to rebuild their marriage. Robert planned to expand the microcredit program to other towns. In town, people still talked about the transformation of both men. The story of the arrogant farmer who became a humble man and the poor neighbor who became a successful businessman was told as proof that people can change, and that true success comes from perseverance and character. On a Sunday afternoon, Robert organized a barbecue at his new home for the consulting firm's employees and their families. Mr. Thompson was there with his wife and children, who had moved back in with him after their reconciliation. As Robert grilled the meat, Mr. Thompson approached him. "Robert, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That day I offered you work at the farm, cleaning stables for $50 a week. If Edward hadn't shown up, would you have taken it?" Robert flipped the meat on the grill before answering. "Probably yes, I had a sick daughter and needed the money." "And you wouldn't have held a grudge against me?" "Maybe at first. But I think with time, I would have understood you were giving me work even if, for the wrong reasons." Mr. Thompson shook his head, impressed. "You're a better man than I ever was." "No, Richard, we just had different experiences. You grew up used to having everything. I grew up used to fighting for everything. That shaped us differently. But you never lost your humanity even when I did everything to break you." Robert stopped tending to the meat and looked at his friend. "You know what I've learned all these years. Life has a way of teaching the right lessons to the right people at the right time. You needed to learn humility. I needed to learn that dreaming big and achieving those dreams was possible. And now? Now we've learned it's better to build together than to destroy apart." The barbecue went on cheerfully. The children played in the yard, the women talked about their kids and future plans. Robert looked around and felt a deep peace. It wasn't just financial success that satisfied him, but the feeling of having built something meaningful. Not just a company, but real relationships and a second chance for someone who had once been his greatest enemy. Later, when everyone had left, Robert and Sarah cleaned up and talked about the day. "You did the right thing giving Richard a chance," Sarah said. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd held a grudge and hadn't stopped to give him a ride that day. But you did stop, and that says everything about who you are." Robert hugged his wife and looked out the window. On the road in front of the house, he could see the lights of passing cars, each carrying people with their own stories, dreams, and struggles. "Sarah, do you think we'll be able to give the kids a good life?" "I'm sure of it. But not just because of the money, because of the example you two are setting. The kids are growing up seeing that it's possible to forgive, start over, and build something good even after so much hardship." Robert smiled. That was what made him proudest. Not the luxury car in the garage or the healthy bank account, but the example he was leaving for his children about character, perseverance, and compassion. The following month, Robert received an unexpected invitation. The city council wanted to honor him as Entrepreneur of the Year. The ceremony would be public, attended by regional officials and business owners from nearby towns. "Robert, you deserve this recognition," said Edward, who had come from Louisville just for the event. "You didn't just build successful businesses, you changed people's lives. I didn't do it alone, I had help from people like you and Mr. Miller. But you knew how to seize opportunities, and more importantly, you used them to help others." That evening, the council chamber was packed. Robert took the stage in a sharp but understated suit. His parents, who had come from the neighboring town where they lived, sat in the front row with tears in their eyes. In his speech, Robert spoke about the importance of honest work, perseverance, and helping one another. "I didn't get here alone," he said to the audience. "Every person who believed in me, who gave me a chance, or simply treated me with respect, was crucial on this journey." He looked out at the crowd and saw Richard sitting in the middle, applauding sincerely. "I also learned that holding on to grudges is like carrying rocks in your backpack. It only weighs you down. Forgiving isn't forgetting. It's choosing to move forward without the burden of the past." After the speech, several people approached Robert to congratulate him. Businessmen offered partnerships, young people asked for advice on starting their own ventures, and mothers thanked him for the job opportunities he'd created in the region. Richard was one of the last to approach. "Great speech, Robert, and thank you for not mentioning my name when you talked about forgiveness." "I didn't, because the story isn't about you being wrong or me being right. It's about how people can change and grow. Still, thank you. And congratulations. You deserve every word of recognition you got today." They embraced sincerely, and Robert felt the circle had finally closed. The poor boy who once begged for work had become a respected businessman, but more importantly, he'd become a man at peace with himself and his past. Years later, when Hope was in high school and Michael in elementary, they asked their father about his life journey. "Dad, how did you escape poverty and become successful?" Michael asked with a child's curiosity. Robert thought carefully. They were on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset over the mountains surrounding Greenfield. "It wasn't easy, son. There were times I wanted to give up. People told me I'd never make it, that someone like me shouldn't dream so big." "But you didn't quit," Hope said. "I didn't because I learned we can't let others define our limits, and because your mother always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." "What about Uncle Richard?" Michael asked. "Why was he so mean to you before?" "Uncle Richard wasn't mean. He was lost, afraid of losing what he had. Sometimes people hurt others when they're scared or insecure." "But you're friends now." "We are, and that taught me people can change if they truly want to. Uncle Richard chose to change, and I chose to forgive. It was good for both of us." Robert looked at his children, his heart full of gratitude. They were growing up in a safe environment with opportunities he never had, but also with the values he cherished most: honesty, perseverance, and compassion. "The most important thing you need to know," he said, "is that success isn't just measured by what we have, but by the kind of person we become along the way." Hope, now 15 and wise beyond her years, asked a question that surprised him. "Dad, do you think if Uncle Richard hadn't humiliated you so much, you'd have gotten where you are?" Robert was silent for a moment, reflecting on his daughter's deep question. "You know, Hope, that's a tough one. Maybe not. The pain from those humiliations gave me a strength I didn't know I had, but that doesn't mean humiliation is necessary for growth." "How so?" "Everyone has their own source of motivation. For me, it was proving those who looked down on me wrong. For others, it might be love for family, the desire to help people, or simply passion for what they do." Michael, younger and more straightforward, asked, "Dad, when I grow up, will I be as rich as you?" Robert laughed and hugged his son. "Michael, I hope you're happy. I hope you're... If wealth comes with happiness, even better. But remember, having money is good, but having character is essential." "What is character, Dad?" "It's doing the right thing even when no one is watching. It's treating people well no matter who they are. It's not giving up when things get tough, but also knowing when to ask for help." That night, after the children went to bed, Robert and Sarah talked about the future. "Robert, have you ever thought about expanding the microcredit program to the whole state?" "I have, but I don't know if I have the energy for something that big." "You don't have to do it all alone. You could start a foundation, hire people, build a bigger structure." Robert considered the idea. He had enough financial resources to fund a larger project, and he knew there were thousands of people in the same situation he had faced years ago. "Maybe it is time to think bigger," he said. "And Mr. Thompson could help you. He knows the rural reality of the whole region." Robert smiled. The idea of working with Richard on a social project seemed like the perfect conclusion to the journey they had shared. The next day, Robert sought out Richard at the company. "I have an idea I want to discuss with you." "What kind of idea?" "Expanding our microcredit program, creating a foundation that serves the whole state." Richard got excited immediately. "Robert, that would be amazing. Think of how many families we could help. Would you be willing to leave consulting to dedicate yourself to this full-time?" "I would. In fact, I have some ideas too. What if we included technical training along with the loan? It's no use giving money if people don't know how to use it properly." They spent the next few weeks developing the project. Robert would handle the financial and administrative side, while Richard would be responsible for beneficiary relations and the technical training. The Hope Foundation, named in honor of Robert's daughter, was officially created 6 months later. The launch event was held in the central square of Greenfield, the same place where Richard had humiliated Robert years before. "It's symbolic for us to be here," Richard said during his speech. "This place represents transformation. Here, I learned that excessive pride leads to downfall, and here, Robert taught me that forgiveness leads to growth." Robert, when he spoke, got straight to the point. The Hope Foundation isn't about giving handouts. It's about giving opportunities. Every dollar loaned should be repaid so others can have their chance too. We believe everyone has potential. They just need an open door. The foundation's first year was a great success. Over 500 families received microcredit and training. The default rate was less than 5%, far below the national average. Robert and Richard traveled constantly across the state, visiting beneficiaries and identifying new opportunities. During one of these trips, they stopped for lunch at a simple roadside diner. "Robert, can I confess something?" Richard said. "Of course. I've never been as happy as I am now. When I had the farm and lots of money, I was always worried, afraid of losing everything. Now, earning less but helping people, I feel complete." It's funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what really matters. Do you think our kids will learn this lesson without going through the hardships we did? Robert thought about the question. "I hope so, but if they don't, at least they'll have our example to follow." True. And who knows, maybe they'll continue the foundation's work when we're no longer here. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the waiter, a young man who seemed nervous. "Excuse me, sirs, are you from the Hope Foundation?" "We are," Robert replied. "My name is John. My mother received a loan from the foundation last year to start a bakery. I wanted to say thank you. Our family's life has completely changed." The young man explained that his mother had lost her job at a factory and couldn't find work because of her age. With the foundation's loan, she set up a small bakery at home that now serves the whole neighborhood. "She's already paid back half the loan and is expanding the business," John said proudly. "And I was able to go back to school because she can support me now." Robert and Richard were moved by his story. This was exactly the kind of transformation they hoped to create. "Tell your mother we're very proud of her," Robert said, "and to keep working hard because her success will inspire others." After the young man walked away, Richard looked at Robert with shining eyes. Moments like these make everything worth it, don't they? They do, and they remind me why we're doing this. 3 years later, the Hope Foundation had already helped over 3,000 families. Robert was invited to speak at universities about social entrepreneurship. Richard became a leading figure in rural microcredit in the country. But what made them proudest wasn't the numbers or the awards they received. It was knowing they had broken the cycle of poverty for thousands of families and created a model that could be replicated in other states. One December evening, Robert was at home preparing the speech he would give at Hope's graduation. She had been chosen as the high school class speaker. Sarah walked into the office with a cup of coffee. "How's the speech coming?" "Tough. I want to talk about dreams and determination, but without sounding like cheap self-help." "Talk about your journey. Real stories always move people more than generic advice." Robert considered his wife's suggestion. Truly, the transformation he and Richard had gone through was more powerful than any theory about success. On graduation night, Robert stepped onto the stage of the school auditorium and looked at the audience. He saw Hope in the front row, beautiful in her graduation dress. He saw Sarah with Michael beside her, smiling proudly, and he saw Richard with his family, who had become almost like relatives to them. "Dear graduates," Robert began, "you're at the start of your journeys. Some of you already know what you want from life, others are still figuring it out. But no matter what path you choose, remember a few important things." He spoke about perseverance, about not letting others define your limits, about the importance of treating everyone with respect. But most of all, he spoke about forgiveness and second chances. "I knew a man who was my greatest enemy for a long time," he said, looking at Richard. "He humiliated me, tried to crush my dreams, made me feel small. But when he needed help, I chose to help him. And I learned that helping an enemy can turn them into one of your best friends." The audience was completely silent. That doesn't mean you should accept mistreatment. It means that when you have the chance to choose between resentment and forgiveness, between revenge and compassion, choose what makes you a better person. At the end of the speech, the audience rose in a warm ovation. Hope stepped onto the stage and hugged her father, whispering in his ear, "Dad, that was the most beautiful speech I've ever heard." Robert smiled and looked at the crowd once more. He saw young faces full of hope and dreams. He wished for all of them to find their own paths to success, but most of all to find happiness and inner peace. After the ceremony, during the celebration, Richard walked up to Robert. "That speech was for me too, wasn't it? It was for everyone who's ever had to choose between good and evil, between forgiveness and revenge. Robert, I'll never be able to thank you enough. You saved me when I was lost. We saved each other, Richard. You taught me that success without compassion is empty. I taught you it's never too late to start over." They watched the young people dancing and celebrating. It was a new generation, full of dreams and possibilities. "Robert, do you think we'll be remembered?" "It doesn't matter if we're remembered or not. What matters is that we made a difference in real people's lives, and those people will make a difference in others' lives. That's how the world changes, one person at a time." "You're right. And you know what else makes me happy?" "What?" "Our children are growing up seeing that it's possible to be successful and a good person at the same time. That's a legacy far more valuable than any material inheritance." Robert nodded in agreement. He looked over at Hope, who was excitedly chatting with her classmates about college plans. Then at Michael, playing with other children in the corner of the room. He saw a future full of possibilities. "Richard, do you think we did everything right?" "We didn't do everything right, Robert. We made mistakes, sometimes made bad decisions, but we always tried to do our best with what we had. And when we messed up, we tried to make it right. That's what matters, isn't it? Not being perfect, but trying to be better every day." "Exactly. And teaching that to our kids." The party went on late into the night. Robert and Sarah were the last to leave, along with Richard and his family. At the school entrance, they said goodbye with warm hugs. On the drive home, Sarah asked, "Robert, are you happy with the life we've built?" "Very happy. We have health, love, and purpose. What more could we want?" "And you don't regret anything?" Robert thought about the question as he drove through the quiet streets. "I don't regret the mistakes I made because they taught me. I don't regret the hardships because they made me stronger. And I don't regret forgiving Richard because it set me free. Even the humiliations? Even the humiliations. They gave me the strength I needed to prove to myself I was capable of more than I imagined." When they got home, Robert went to the children's room. Hope was asleep with a smile on her face, still wearing her graduation dress. Michael was curled up with a stuffed bear. Robert tucked them in tenderly and watched them for a few minutes. They represented the future, the hopes, the dreams fulfilled. But most of all, they were proof that breaking cycles and creating a better reality was possible. In his room before bed, Robert took out a small notebook where he wrote down important thoughts. He wrote, "Today I realized true wealth isn't in what we gain, but in what we're able to give. Real success isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we build. And true victory isn't over others, but over our own limitations." He closed the notebook and lay down beside his wife. Outside, the world kept turning, with all its injustices and challenges. But here, in this home, in this family, In this story of transformation and forgiveness, there was a small piece of paradise built with hard work, love, and above all the courage to believe it's always possible to be better. And so the poor boy who once begged for work on the arrogant neighbor's farm had become not just a man rich in material things, but rich in experiences, relationships, and most of all, inner peace. The road had been long and hard, but every step was worth it. The end. So, what did you think of this story of perseverance and forgiveness? Tell us in the comments if you've ever been in a similar situation where you had to forgive someone who hurt you. Did the transformation of Robert and Richard touch your heart? Leave a like if you enjoyed their story and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring tales like this one. Thanks for joining us.